You're listening to Opacity, a podcast about working in design. Morning, Craig.
Good morning, Tom.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Oh yeah, we haven't spoken
since
the New Year. Yeah. How are you? How are you feeling in the new year?
Yeah, pretty good. Like all things considered, still kind of like settled in at home, as we were kind of chatting before about this. The home life and remote work and that kind of stuff kind of suits me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a bit of a homebody in general, so I've kind of adapted all right to it. How about yourself?
Yeah, good. I mean, a lot of the same, I guess. Nothing's really any different than it was in December. But I'll go with the positivity and go with the new year, new me, all kinds of stuff.
Nice.
Did you set any resolutions, Tom, that you'd like to share?
Not really. No, not really. I probably should do a bit more exercise, just for in general, just to get out of the house a bit more. So I'm tempted to try that. I've seen people talk about like 100 walks, 100 albums, which my understanding of it is that you go for a walk once a day and then listen to the whole album at least, and then kind of post about it. But I think that could be something that I'll try to do, just to get out and couple the walking with an album. So it's kind of, I'm not cheating and trying to get back too soon.
That's interesting. How long? It's been so long that I've listened to an album. Like, how long are they? Are they like an hour?
It depends on. I suppose it depends. Yeah. I listen to a lot of metal, so like a lot of stuff will be faster and generally more kind of shorter albums than I think more popular music. But so I have to be careful not to cheat. I'm not going out for a 20-minute album.
I never heard of that one. That's good. Yeah. So the topic we were chatting about getting into this week, and it might be sort of an overview of this sort of thing, because it's a big topic that I think there's a lot to probably say on it. There's a lot of different rabbit holes we can go down, so maybe we'll sort of dip our toes into a few of them, dip our noses into a few rabbit holes, maybe not run all the way down, but yeah, just sort of see where we get to. And that's kind of talking about this whole generalist specialist kind of divide, or sort of the path of specialization versus the sort of being okay with being a generalist, and what are the kind of the good things about that. So yeah, we just sort of want to chat about that. So
yeah,
would you call yourself a specialist or a generalist?
Yeah, I feel like we've chatted about this before, maybe in one of our earlier episodes, and yeah, it's something I kind of think about regularly enough, I suppose. I can't remember what my answer was at the time when we were talking, but I still kind of think of myself as like somewhere in between, like a specialized generalist, I suppose. I mean, like that. I feel like I've got a couple of specialties, some core competencies, and then there's like I've got a broad range of knowledge on other areas as well. So I think when I started out first, the agency that I joined from college, they wanted to build out T-shaped designers, which is like an uppercase T. So you'd have one core competency. So that in my case, it was like visual design had a visual communications background, and then they try and bridge out the other. So that's your depth, and then you've got a kind of a broader, like the top of the T. I suppose the kind of the horizontal line of the T is not as deep, but you've got a breadth of skills. So it might be like if your core skill at the time is visual design, then you might have other things that are like prototyping and some interaction design and some things like that. Maybe a little bit of front end coding, possibly. That's these types of things. But you're being hired really for the core competency of the visual design, and then over time that grows, I suppose. Like that's in my experience. I think I grew a few more kind of like verticals, I suppose, just because I was interested in, and I was in a kind of I worked in areas where you deal with a lot of people which would have different specialties, so you could learn a lot from them, and by osmosis, kind of deep in those areas too. How about yourself?
Yeah, it's an interesting one to think about. Did you refer to yourself as a specialized generalist? Was that are you coining that?
I don't know. I don't know if I made that up or what, but because when I hear people talk about it, often the conversation I think in this thing is like you're either a specialist or you're a generalist, and I don't think it's that clear cut, in general. Like, so I think, no pun intended, but I think like you can be, they're not mutually exclusive. So you can you could start out with a kind of specialism and then flesh out and have more general skills as well. So you've got a specialist, you've got a specialism, and you've got some more general skills as well. Or you could start out as a generalist and then over time build a specialism into that area, or a couple of specialisms. So to me, they're not one or the other. I think when people talk about it, maybe they refer to someone who's just like comes out maybe of a, maybe a certain type of education. They've got a very specific set of skills. They don't kind of grow in the other areas because they want to focus solely on this area and be specialists in this area. So I think that's commonly how people talk about it, but I don't think it's always the case.
Yeah. I think there's like obviously a lot of complexity here, and what do we mean by these words? Because it's sort of like, if you imagine the entirety of like the taxonomy of skills and knowledge that could be attained by the human mind, like everything that exists.
Yeah.
That's sort of like the most generalist would be able to play in all of those fields, and then that gets narrower and narrower. And then at what point does a generalist become a specialist? Like, I could say, Tom, you're a specialist in design. There's a specializations in even the general field that we work in, right? So there's like, and then I was thinking about this earlier of like, just where are the lines? Like, okay, I was thinking about you actually. You work in a design system team. Okay, are you a specialist in design systems? Potentially, like that could be a thing you do. Is being a specialist in design systems require you to be a generalist because of sort of the nature of that work? Like, so I think these things are a bit like, it's probably more of a personal kind of definition of where you kind of draw those lines.
Good call.
Like, I think. I think of myself as a generalist, kind of a proud generalist, and it's taken me some time to sort of get there. And the way I look at it is specifically being general beyond design. It is bringing things outside of this sort of design bubble. So there's sort of I guess there's the T-shaped designer who can do everything from research to visual design and everything, or research to front end development and everything in between or whatever. But in a way that's sort of still like a specialization. Like if that's their focus, they don't bring anything from even more general categories like outside of that design world, then are they really a generalist? I don't know. Like, I think it's a personal definition. So, what do you think?
Well, it's impossible to know how to do everything.
Yeah.
But I think this is an interesting point you're making there. I think generally when people talk about this, it's stuff it's skills or abilities that are related to the field itself. So it's not, when you say someone's a generalist, you don't expect them to be able to do absolutely everything in any. If they're a design generalist, there's kind of like we expect them to be able to like be pretty decent at this, pretty decent at that, an all-rounder within design type thing. I mean, people can have many other skills, and they can bring other skills and other life experiences and stuff like that can inform how they design. But I think generally when people talk about a generalist within design, that's kind of what they're expecting. They have a broad range of skills on most of the areas, most of the different kind of disciplines within design. I
mean, I think that's like, if I were hiring a designer and I was saying, I'm looking for a generalist to join the team, like that would be the definition that I would definitely go with. I think personally, when I've kind of almost like sort of wrestled with this idea of being a generalist, I think also as someone who's done things outside of design and then joined this field a little bit later, I've wrestled with, what do I do with those other things that I've done? And like, is it just sort of, that's what I did in the past, it's irrelevant. I sort of, remove it from my mind. It's like, when I'm doing design, those things are irrelevant, but they're not irrelevant. They're part of who I am. They're part of my lens for, all of the experiences we have. Like, they come into play, and they sort of, I think they sort of get mixed in the pot of generalization or being a generalist. And like I've over the years, like, it's been hard to articulate, and it probably still is hard to articulate what's the actual value that those things bring. Like, what's the tangible value? Like, if I'm a designer, what's the tangible value that I work in whatever, like we talked about, this sort of the door-to-door fundraising work that I did way back when in the middle of winter. You know, what does that actually tangibly bring? Like I can say, oh, like that experience taught me things, and then it brought it, whatever. Like I can make a story around it. But like, do I truly believe that it actually makes me a better designer? So I think that's, for me, that's been a bit of a journey, is, you know, getting okay with that, and like actually try to be able to articulate like what that benefit is. It's not easy.
Yeah, I think, is it worth chatting a little bit around like what is the definition of a good designer? I mean, because I think a lot of we talk about skills and stuff. It's often kind of leaning towards like hard skills, or you know, like our craft in an area. And I think if you're listening to this, or if you're new into the industry, you're kind of like, what are the things I need to be able to do to be a designer? And it's, you know, so say like visual design is a very easy one to narrow down on, I suppose, because it's like the visual representation of stuff, and it's outputs kind of driven and that kind of thing. And you need to, a certain, like, stuff needs to be brought to a certain standard and that kind of thing. But there's other areas that are not so, you know, you can't see the output. You know, like, you know, say our research. There's a lot of like more software / kind of professional skills required to be able to do that work as well. So maybe this is, I don't know, actually maybe this is opening a can of worms because it's too big of a topic to take on. But I wonder if, like, to your point around your experiences before, I think like most of what we do as the designers is like talking to people, communicating with people, trying to solve problems together. It's not, you know, we have computers, but we're not like in doing pixel based moving stuff around all the time, that kind of thing. So those skills that you learn to be able to like communicate with people, to understand other people's points of view, to understand people's needs, to understand what's you know, where compromises possibly need to be made, like, you know, from a business and design perspective. There's loads of this stuff, it's kind of it's like a tangled ball of like different amorphous challenges. You know, it's not straightforward. I think if you, from the outside, if you're looking at the world of design, you might just think, oh, I design, you know, the software designers, so I would just sit down and I create these screens, and that's my job. It's like that is a part of it, but it's not nearly the. That's not what people are hiring you for, you know. And it's they're not trying to hire a collection of skills. They're trying to hire a person who has knowledge and points of view and perspective and all those types of things.
That's the hope, right? Like, I would hope that people are trying to not just hire a bag of skills, even though that's probably sometimes what happens. But like, the point you're making there, the way I was thinking about this was, you know, I think it's probably fair to say we still live in a world where specialization is like more valued, or it's at least more attractive, both to the person trying to gain skills, but also the person who's paying for those skills. Like, it's a lot clearer. It's a clearer message, and I often think about this in terms of like how a designer would like market themselves as they're putting together their own website or whatever. It's like specialization is like creating a clear message about who you are. Like, it's like if I say, hi, my name's Craig, I'm a multidisciplinary designer who works at the intersection of blah 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 and blah blah blah, like, okay, whatever, like, what does that actually mean? Whereas if I said, hey, I'm Craig, I'm like a specialist in animation, it's much easier to hire me for a job that's an animation job because I'm really good at that particular thing, as opposed to like this sort of vague general type of message, which it's not actually saying anything clear. So it's sort of a marketing thing, I think. But so all that to say, I think we live in an environment where specialization is still valued, probably over generalization, instead of or on top of generalization. So I think it creates an issue because for those of us who are generalists, or sort of self-proclaimed generalists and proud of it, we have an issue because I think oftentimes our work is evaluated based on sort of narrow metrics or narrow kind of understandings of what design is. So like, I could be a generalist, I bring in all of these good communication skills and all these kind of professional or soft skills, whatever. But like, at the end of the day, I'm evaluated based on maybe like one specific hard skill that I have. So I think if that's true, and it's sort of a hypothetical, but I think if it's true, it's sort of pushes us towards specialization. It always, I think it's always, at least for me, it's always something that's always kind of pulling me in a direction of like, oh, there's this specialization that I know I'm kind of weak in, and it's maybe a thing that I could be evaluated better on if I upskilled in it. And, you know, I'm free to upskill in it, but like, you know, am I going to go down a path of specialization down that for that skill? Like, I don't know. I don't know if that's a good career move or not, you know?
Yeah, well, the example you just mentioned there sounds like a different thing. It's like if you feel weak in an area or weaker than you would like to be, you don't just change. You don't just go, right, I'm going to drop everything else now, and I'm just going to move over here and just focus on this thing and specialize in this. That's a different thing to me to like say, okay, that's a weakness I have. So what'll I do? I'll do something to kind of beef it up a bit. Like, so I'll beef up my general skills in that area. I don't need to master them, but I need to have, you know, I need to just kind of beef them up a bit.
Yeah.
And the mastery thing is an interesting thing, an interesting concept for me as well, right? Because I think when people talk about generalists, they also the kind of idea of like, oh, jack of all trades but master of none, which sounds like it's inferred that this person going around is kind of like doing a half-assed job on lots of things, you know, where I don't think that's the case. You know, I really don't think that's the case.
Yeah. On that topic. So on that saying, actually, this came up in a conversation recently, and the person I was speaking to educated me on this saying, which was actually really, really good, and I've thought a lot about it since. So, are you familiar with the full saying? Like jack of all trades, master of none. So yeah, there's more to that saying that I didn't even know existed. I think most people probably don't. So it's jack of all trades, master of none, though oftentimes better than master of one. So it's actually in support of generalization, which is nice and validating for myself. But yeah, so that's, I think, an interesting.
How did that get dropped? That's the best part.
I know. It really rounds out the saying really nicely. And I had no idea. I think most people have no idea that this exists. So thank you to the one who informed me this.
Oh, that's so interesting. The fact that you just we've cherry picked a part of this, and then we only use this part for everything. And what people actually would use that in an almost derogatory term. Yeah. Oh, he's a jack of all trade. That guy, like, you know, as in he's not very good at anything. He'll give everything a go. That type of thing. Or the person will give everything a go. Whereas by just editing out the full thing. We're losing the full context of what the thing actually means. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and sort of on this topic, I think of this. I mentioned kind of I'm validated by this statement now, or this saying now. Validation was a thing. So there's a book called Range. It's called Range: How Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. It's a really good book by David Epstein. You may have heard of it. I definitely recommend if you think about being a generalist or about specialization and all of that. It's just a really fascinating, I think, book. And for me, it was eye-opening to read it as someone who kind of, like I was saying before, you know, I've thought of myself as a generalist, but I've never been able to actually maybe truly believe that that's a good thing. So the book is really good, kind of, and it's a big book. There's it's a heavy one. But it gives a lot of kind of historical examples of people from sports to music to art, you know, people like Van Gogh, who are, you know, very late in their life actually sort of figured out what they were good at. And it took a lot of different experiences to get there. But the book is really good and sort of unpacking the whole sort of experience of being a generalist and actually putting some research behind the case, basically the case for being a generalist, and how it's actually it's not just an okay thing. It's not just on par with being a specialist. It's actually, you know, a really good thing. It's actually it brings a lot of value to somebody. And that's sort of probably like the generalization within sort of the design sphere, but also beyond that would probably be the more kind of the view of that book is like, as a designer, if you have experiences doing things that are wildly outside of design, that's going to impact you in the work that you can do. So yeah, I highly recommend checking that book out.
I must check it out. I haven't read that yet, but I think like some of the points you're making there are kind of ringing some bells in my mind here. Where you're talking about like it's the variety of experiences as well, which I think is huge. If like as someone who's just like, you know, got a family, bought a house, got into more, like, was never interested in DIY, but did some stuff when, as you buy your own house and you kind of start getting involved in things. Like, when you build up all these little things, all these different life experiences, all these challenges that you face, they kind of just like reinforce your understanding of the world and give you different perspectives that are transferable to other areas of your life as well, and other challenges as well. And sure, even the example, I remember way back in one of our episodes, you were talking about this scenario where you went on the bus with your son when he was really young and he threw up, and it was a kind of chaotic issue. But, when you go through something that you're prepared next time, if it happens again, you're not going to panic as much. So, like, that's what I think those types of experience are really good at. Different types of experience in your career and life, they kind of like prepare you for that next time as well. So you don't panic, or if something similar in a different area of your life or work happens, you're probably less likely to panic and kind of go, okay, listen, I've faced a similar situation and X, Y, and Z happened. So it basically informs. It makes you more kind of you've got a kind of richer texture of all the problems that you could face, and the solutions that you can possibly come about.
I think talking about this now, like, what this comes to mind is, okay, we claim to be creatives, quote unquote, capital C creatives. We are in a creative industry. Like, what makes creativity? Like, creativity is about connections, right? It's about linking two disparate things and finding something new, innovating something new that is sort of comes from both worlds. So we need to have like a breadth of experience in order to be creative and to bring anything of value into the mix. I think I've sort of reflecting on this now. I think for me, generalization, if I can give an example, at least that just popped up, is sort of working with in sort of technical environments. So personally, I have zero technical knowledge. I am nothing. Like, when I started as a designer, I remember, like, the most vivid kind of memory was sitting in a room with engineers and other designers talking about sort of technical matters, and I had no idea what was going on. And I'm sure a lot of new designers probably have similar experiences. I think being a generalist and having different types of experiences has allowed me to sort of play in that court, at least have coherent conversations without really having any hard technical abilities personally. Like, I can't write any code, but I can still be in conversation with people who are really good at doing that and have productive and actually bring, hopefully bring some value to that conversation. And I think that comes, I think part of the value of generalization is you learn how to learn, or you learn how to adapt, or you learn how to sort of pick up on things better because you've been in a lot of different types of situations where you're talking about, like, new situations. You learn new skills, you figure things out in different ways, and your brain sort of grows in a way, and then you're put in another new situation, you're able to deal with that, as opposed to if you were living in some kind of a skills bubble where you had this deep specialization. Now you get thrown in a pool that you don't know how to swim. You're just gonna sink because you don't have the ability to actually keep yourself afloat. And I think, if I'm remembering rightly, that's part of the things in that book range that kind of comes up is that ability, that sort of mental practice.
Yeah, I think what I tend to like about people who are drawn towards being generalists as well is that, like, to my mind, design is about problem solving and creative problem solving and stuff like that. And when problems arise and challenges arise, I think it's, like, personally, I prefer people who are kind of like, okay, this is not my core area of expertise, but, like, how can I leverage the knowledge I have to try and influence this? Does that kind of approach, or does kind of like, well, this is not my area of expertise, so I'm out of this conversation. Bye. Do you know that? No, I know that's kind of a very simple oversimplification, but I think whatever we need to do, like, we need to be constantly learning. It's about growth mindset, to my mind, of, like, just learning new skills, understanding new ways of solving problems, understanding those problems that need to be solved, all that type of stuff. I think it's so important. And I think, to your point, some of the points we were mentioning around, like, being able to, like, roll with punches type thing, I think adaptability is really important. I think as humans, like we are so adaptive, you know, and we've evolved to this stage because we're adaptive in different environments and stuff like that. So I think when I think of like one of the examples, I think it's not because to do with design at all, but it's another analogy, I suppose, is like I don't really watch that much sports, but I do like mixed martial arts. And mixed martial arts is that exactly. It's a mixture of the different martial arts. And often you'll have, or from time to time, you'll have someone coming from a special sport like boxing, for example, who's very good at boxing, and they come into the mixed martial arts world and they're like, right, I was a world champion, I have all these belts, I should do pretty good here. And they come in and all their skills are around boxing. And they come in and someone takes them down to the ground and wrestles them, and they're like a deer in the headlights. You see it happen again and again, right? Because there's a range of skills required in mixed martial arts, and you can't rely overly on one specialization, because it's a good example. Like, you know, you're unlikely to get tackled to the ground in your professional life, but if you're ready to adapt to that new situation, you know, that just exposes the gaps in someone's skills when in mixed martial arts, right? And what I like about that is that they just have to train in so many different areas, like jiu-jitsu, obviously, like, you know, boxing, kickboxing, wrestling, all this type of stuff. And what they're doing is they're building up these skills that makes them adaptable quickly to a change in situations. So that's probably a very kind of, obviously a violent example.
Perfect analogy. Yeah, it's really perfect. Yeah. Yeah, I think this whole piece of adaptability is really important. And I think like we also can think of, this is something maybe I wrote about a while ago, about like sort of future-proofing your career. And part of me thinks that not part of me, all of me thinks that adaptability is necessary. Like, you know, things change fast and things are changing faster than ever. And, you know, in 5 years from now, we don't really know what this design industry is going to be. Like, what are we going to call ourselves? Like, you know, a couple of years ago, a lot of us had the title of UX design. Like, now a lot of those UX designers are product designers. You know, what we call ourselves changes like every couple of years. The tools we use change, like everything changes. If you're not adaptable, you can't, like, whatever. Like, I know people often bring up this sort of experts in Flash and how that became an irrelevant kind of a skill. You know, like, so, and that specialization then can sort of lead to a problem. Like, if you specialize in one thing that is sort of trending right now, when that stops trending, you need to be able to adapt, either find a new specialization that you can, like a tangential one, or think about more generalist skills that you can stretch across, have more breadth, to be able to do different things, and, you know, still figuring out what you like and what you're maybe really good at, or what you're kind of drawn to, and then invest in those things. But try to also have like a bit of a future vision of like, okay, in 10 years, if this particular thing that I'm focusing on is irrelevant, what am I going to do, and how am I going to sort of broaden and always be broad and always be flexible and always be adaptable to changes that are happening.
Yeah, I agree there. And it doesn't have to be over time as well. I think it might be confusing possibly for people coming into the industry. Like, I need to have all these skills. Do you know, if they're a recent graduate or new to the industry, and they kind of feel like, well, I can't do all of these things just yet. Yeah. I think, as you're saying, like, focus on the things you're good at, and then you can expand over time. You can flesh things out over time. Like, one of the things, I know we mentioned it in the previous episode as well, maybe around breaking into the industry part 1, I think it was. But like when people are enthusiastic as well, do you know, like having interest and enthusiasm, like authentic enthusiasm for learning and new experiences and stuff, that's so important, you know. And so I think it's, even if you identify things that you're interested in learning, but you haven't started just yet, or you don't know how to start, you know, people are always, they like to help, you know, and they'll point you in the right direction. Nobody expects you to come straight out of, you know, to just break into the industry and have all of these skills, these wide range of skills. I think earlier it's better to focus on some of the things, you know, like there could be a handful of things that you're good at, or a specific area that you can have general skills in that area without overly specializing, if that makes sense. I don't know. It's kind of it's difficult
tricky.
To kind of explain.
Yeah, it's tricky. Like, and I think part of it is kind of just how you market yourself. Like I don't know, like how you talk about yourself and what kind of designer you are, and what are the things you like to be really also self-aware about the things that you feel you kind of are most drawn to, and maybe invest a bit more in those things. Like if you're a generalist designer, but you really love the research process and all that. And maybe you don't want to specialize in research, but you want to be a designer that's always involved in research and contributing in that way and whatever. Like, that's great. Like, that's a good sort of, I guess, to that sort of T-shape kind of thing. Like, okay, my deep dive in my T is in maybe research in general, or even a specific area of research, whatever. But it's all needs to be sort of self-defined. Like, you can't, new designers who I think a lot of people fall into that trap, and I think I was falling into these traps too when I was starting out. It's like, okay, where do I focus? What do I need to do? What are the gaps I need to fill so that I can get that job? For me, it was like this sort of internal dialogue of like, oh, I don't have at the time what I was telling myself is, I don't have a graphic design background. I'm gonna really struggle because like I don't have the sort of visual skills to get the job, because everybody's gonna look at my UIs and they're gonna be ugly and they're not gonna hire me. And that was the kind of internal back and forth that was going into my head. I think other people like probably see code as a thing, like, oh, I'm getting into this industry, but I don't know how to write HTML and CSS, so therefore like I need to go in and learn code. It's like, well, not learning code has never held me back. In my career, I think a lot of designers are the same way. Like, if you want, like my response to that is usually, if you want to and you're interested in it, like, go for it, like learn it, become great at it, like whatever, maybe that's your thing. But it shouldn't, none of these sort of specializations should be seen as like, they're not essential. Yeah.
But you said that you did, even though you don't have the technical skills, you have built up a kind of vocabulary that you can, and ways of communicating. So
and I think that's important. That's part of the job, and that's obviously part of the benefit of learning something about coding and all that. There's obviously benefits that come with that, but they shouldn't be seen as essential. And every designer, I think people sometimes talk about the shape of a designer. Like, everybody has their sort of unique shape, and that's okay. And your shape should be like your own, and you should really be happy with that shape. And like, no shape. Like, if every designer was a cookie cutter of the other one, we wouldn't be very valuable, right? Because we could be easily replaced with somebody new. But you are unique.
Yeah, that's true. But and usually when roles are like, when companies are putting up roles, and even if they do kind of plaster the terms across the board of like UX UI designer with what these X Y and Z skills, like a range of skills that are required. I think you tend to see that was more so with smaller companies, and you're expected to wear a few more hats. But I think usually when you dig in a bit further, most roles there's a leaning towards something. They're kind of like, to your point that you're saying earlier on, like, say my role is on a design system. Like, if I was hiring someone from a design systems perspective, I'm looking for a range of skills that they need to have to be able to converse, because it's not just talking to designers. You kind of need to understand, visual design. You need to understand, UI design. You need to understand other things like that. Some knowledge in like the technical landscape is useful. Not that you'll ever be coding or anything, but just because it's a specific type of thing. That each role is slightly different, right? So you might be like, well, this person that I'm hiring needs to converse with these three different type of people primarily. So they need to have a good vocabulary.
Well, Tom, I think that was a good chat. I hope everyone enjoyed listening. Thanks for making it to the end. If you have thoughts on this topic, we'd love to hear from you. Love to hear how you think about specialization or being a generalist. Love to hear your thoughts. So thanks so much for listening.
Thanks for listening to Opacity. To find any links mentioned in the episode, check out the show notes. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues, post about it on social media, or leave us a rating or review wherever you listen. This helps us keep the podcast relevant and helps others discover new episodes. You can listen and subscribe to Opacity on iTunes, Spotify, Anchor, or wherever you consume audio. To connect with the show, find us on Twitter @Opacity Podcast, or search for Opacity Podcast on YouTube. Opacity is an independent podcast hosted by me, Tom Cunningham, and my co-host Craig Phillips, recorded and published in Dublin, Ireland. Thanks again for listening.